Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. Today's guest is YouTuber Steve Franssen, joining us once again. Steve, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I was just checking this music video I did for Heave Ho. It's my new single, and I just saw that YouTube stole about 30% of the views. They just wiped 30% of the views off of the view count. So I'm livid. That's how I am.
The big tech always has to hide what culture we do. They don't want the world to know that we're getting millions and millions of views. They do that with my own videos. I know that I have 30 million viewers out there, but they do not show that in the view count. They do not want people to know the truth. So maybe one day they'll let the truth be known. But anyway, we've got a jam-packed episode today. And first up, of course, is the Republican National Convention. First impression, it was far superior to the Zoom call DNC. There were no pudgy people bunched up outside in masks. No horrible banter between celebrities, as we saw Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Andrew Yang had, where somebody pointed out that it resembled the NPC dialogue in the old Elder Scrolls games. If you should check it out, it was really bad. It's like, oh, that's a funny joke. Ha ha. Yeah. Very bad. There was no hideous music videos. That abomination Billy Porter video that hopefully America will one day overcome and forget that trauma. Nothing like that. And there were no denunciations of systemic racism, which was pretty much a part of every speech given at the DNC. So better in that regard. It also featured patriotic aesthetics. It looked like an actual televised experience, not a horrible Zoom call. They had speakers speaking from an auditorium, or they're giving taped addresses in in a good location rather than in their living room where the computer monitors in the background. Most people stayed on message, and the message was largely good. What do you think? How did you think the convention went, Steve?
It went better than I expected, because when I saw the speaker lineup, I just thought, oh man, this is going to be so brutal. But then the point of comparison really is compared to the DNC. And yeah, the DNC was embarrassing. Very sad. It had a very PBS money drive sort of feel to it. It's like, please.
Yeah, no, that's true.
They're very sad and just sort of, oh, we'll be destroyed if Trump gets in a second term. Please don't let him destroy us. So, the RNC was strong in comparison. You're totally right about the optics. And the speeches were mostly on point. I mean, they all sort of stuck to this 50-point agenda that the GOP came out with, or the Trump administration came out with. There were a few exceptions. A couple, some guy saying that George Floyd was murdered when he obviously wasn't.
Yeah, John Jr. actually said that, and a bunch of people were giving prayers for Jacob Blake. There was, I think it was the second night, the minister, who I believe was a Hispanic woman, was we're offering prayers up for Jacob Blake. And Jaron Smith, who is a White House advisor, was also talking about Jacob Smith. He also, Jaron, or is it Jaron? I don't know how to pronounce it. It's not important. He was saying that, we're so glad that there's this moment of national racial consciousness emerging. In some ways that might sound base, but it was not it was the blue-pilled meaning he was giving. Yeah. And he was saying that Trump is understanding this moment, and he has a lot of compassion and empathy, and people just don't understand that. And I'm like, what? You're playing all these clips of the riots and the need for law and order, and then they have these speakers who would go up and deliver these pro criminal justice reform messages about how he understands. Joe Biden locked up all these innocent black drug distributors and crack dealers in the 90s, and Trump let them go. It was but we also need to lock up all the rioters. It's wait a minute. There's a discrepancy here.
Yeah, there is some discordance. That we're supposed to be a law and order people, but then at the same time we're supposed to be very compassionate and letting people out, especially if they're black. That's very important to keep the black family together, and so we need to let black males out indiscriminately. And so it is very confused. And I think Trump is just making such a hard play for the black vote. I hope it pays off for him. It didn't in the first 2 years of his administration, and playing for the midterms really didn't move the needle much, but hopefully it does this time around. I mean, this is sort of their gambit. This is what they're going for, and it's not what I would choose. Like, I would just appeal to the base and just correct immigration, just restrict immigration, stop the State Department from messing around, and then just appeal to the base on message. But they're going to make this play. They're convinced that if they get the black vote once, they'll get it forever, and then the back of the Democrat Party will be broken forever. But that's more of a Kushner angle, really, than what Trump came into office on his mandate, what Middle America voted for him for. So I don't know. I guess I have to support them because that's what they're doing. But I think there are better ways of spending their time. I mean, they're just doing hokey stuff. Like, Eric Trump is like posting a video of his wife, like, put it on her makeup, and just humiliate him.
Holding the brushes and stuff. It's so pathetic. Now, that might have been one of the worst moments. It's like, my personal assistant, Eric Trump, is like, that's your husband. Like, what are you doing to him? This is like a humiliation ritual. It's like, it's so embarrassing to do that to your husband. Donald Trump himself would have never allowed Melania or any of his wives to do that to him in public. And it's like him holding all the brushes and her just like grabbing it out of his hand like he's like the little serf. The servant boy. And you're like, what are you doing? Like, this is so embarrassing and cringe. There was that stuff. I mean, that's not really necessarily political. It's more just like, come on, man, what are you doing, Eric? That he would even do that. But even with the black appeal, I'm not even quite sure that is directed to winning over the black vote. I think this is more directed to the white suburbanites who are hesitant about voting for Trump because they think he's a racist. And them parading all these blacks, this might have been the RNC with the highest number of black speakers. I mean, they had at least a dozen. I think it was more than that. I think it was like 20. And they just like found everybody. I mean, there was the bank robber that he pardoned. There was the major crack distributor that he had released from jail due to Kim Kardashian telling him to do. There's just all these random black supporters that they just found, and like, you need to give a speech about how Trump is not a racist. Some of them are fine. Like, I thought Herschel Walker's speech was fine. There was a few other. I think Burgess Owens gave an okay speech, but Ben Carson gave a terrible speech.
Oh yeah,
but I mean, Carson. He was gonna have to give one. I mean, he's like a cabinet secretary. I mean, he's like, whatever. He's not that bad. But Jaron Smith's speech was obviously the worst part of the moment. But all this was done as a way of telling these white suburbanites it's not racist to vote for Trump. These black guys say he's not a racist, so it's okay. You can vote for him. It's fine. Like, don't worry about what the mainstream media is saying. Trust J. Ron Smith and Ben Carson instead. Yeah, maybe that's will work. I mean, they also at the same time were making this big play with suburbanites by saying, Democrats are going to destroy your dream. They're going to send criminals out there and move them right in next to you. And I think the best speech besides Trump's was the McCloskey speech. I mean, the McCloskey couple, of course, were the famous people who pulled guns on the Black Lives Matter rioters who were in their St. Louis neighborhood and then were charged. Charges dropped, thankfully. And they're now become a symbol of defending yourself against the mob, just as Kyle Rittenhouse now as well, which we'll get to, later on in the podcast. Their speech was incredible because it was just like saying Democrats, they coddle criminals, they protect criminals from honest citizens like themselves. They no longer protect honest citizens from criminals, which we've seen, ever since the George Floyd riots, ever since late May. We've seen them time and time again protect these criminals and allow them to burn down businesses and homes and attack people without any consequences. We keep seeing that, that's 100% point. And then they're talking about how they want to move Section 8 housing out to the suburbs and allow, in zoning restrictions that have allowed suburbs to be nice places for people to live. And they're just going to allow everyone to move in. They're going to allow rioters to maraud through your neighborhood. And they're going to allow crime to skyrocket with all their war on the police and defunding the police. And it's a very effective message. That was almost the message. They did convey a lot of what they were saying throughout the speech. I mean, throughout the convention, especially in Trump's, keynote address. but they weren't really figuring out. At one hand, you had people like McCloskey's, talk about law and order, and several people even in the same speeches would talk about law and order, and then say, my father, the Trump kids would say, my dad or the president, released all these criminals, and that's a great thing. And I'm like, wait, what's going on here? But, overall point, I think there is something that to Trump's ego that they do think that he can get like 15% of the black vote. But the smarter reason that they're doing this, or the real strategy, I think underlying it is they're trying to appeal to hesitant white suburbanites who think it's disrespectable to vote for Trump, and because he's a racist and whatever, that they need reassurances that he's not. And if they have all these black speakers saying he's not a racist, then that gives them comfort.
Yeah, we need the most prominent black man in the United States, like Floyd Mayweather, or I don't know, maybe we could get Barack Obama.
Well, Floyd Mayweather is a Trump supporter, I believe.
Yeah, I think he is a Trump supporter. If we could get the dirt, the ping pong dirt on Barack Obama, and get his arm twisted behind his back, and get him to give the N-word pass to Donald Trump, I think race relations in America will be healed.
Maybe so. I don't know. I don't know if Obama can give that away, because he's half Kenyan. He's not ADOS. ADOS is Tariq Nasheed always likes to talk about. He's not the real African Americans that that some of those black nationalists are always complaining about. So maybe he does. It's not in his power to give, unfortunately, for Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Yeah, but moving on from a lot of these other speeches, there was some other good ones. Like I think Matt Gaetz gave a very good speech. It was right on message, attacking Democrats for abandoning law and order, supporting cancel culture, embracing America as like a land of frontiersmen and conquerors. It was a very good speech. I thought Nick Sandmann's speech was very good about standing up to the mob and not letting them get the best of you, and fighting back and winning. Which he has done through his lawsuits and being exonerated in the public square. There were some, those were very good. I think most of them weren't that bad. It was more just like, okay, it's fine. They had the aggressive nun, which was kind of good optics. They just, for the most part, it was like a fine event. Like most stuff was kind of bland. I mean, it was like, he's bringing jobs back. It's like, it's fine. It's trying to create this thing that, Trump had a successful normal economy before all these disasters struck, and he can bring it back again, which maybe is an appealing message. I mean, his poll numbers are going up. We'll talk about that later on in the podcast about the poll numbers. But I know there was a few other lowlights is about the immigration angle, is that, he hosted this silly naturalization ceremony with like 5 people ripped straight from central casting out of like a PBS show about immigration. They're all non-white. There was like I think it was like a Middle East. There was like 2 Middle Easterners. One was wearing a hijab. The other one wasn't. They had one woman in an full Indian dress. They had a Hispanic guy, and then they had like an African immigrant. And it was like, it just looked so silly. And like 2 of the people had no idea that this was going to be broadcast to the whole world, or that Trump was going to be there. And they're like, what am I doing
That's
here?
Right.
And then they were just sitting there, and Trump, I mean, the message that was delivered could have been far worse by Trump. I mean, they could have been like, our nation was built by people like you. Our nation is immigrants. Like, it doesn't matter if you're black, white, brown, red, whatever, you can be American too, as long as you bleed red, white, and blue. There was none of that messages. It was just a simple, still kind of cringe, like, oh, you worked hard, you played by the rules, you did this, you immigrated legally, and we love that. And they didn't really emphasize surprisingly the pro-immigration angle, but the optics were terrible. And apparently they violated the Hatch Act in the process, because the Hatch Act prohibits political officials engaging in campaign events, which DHS Secretary Chad Wolf was there, and it was a naturalization ceremony, which is not supposed to be a part of a political party's national convention. I don't think anyone really thought it was a good idea. I mean, what did you think of it?
Well, I thought it was very cringe, and it's just funny that like 2 of the people didn't even know that they were going to be part of the RNC, and they're just sort of like dazed. Like American citizenship is so cheap now that it's a political gimmick. Like it's so meaningless at this point that it can just be used for like a gimmick. And I think that's precisely, I mean, like I think some people will look at this and be like, oh, this is heartwarming. Like they're joining the American family. But the real message there is like that this is just sort of like a game now. Like we get to just play with the American citizenship standards and just like make anybody, you know, like, look, we just dragged these people off a barge and here they are. And like, we're giving them these papers and see, look at us, we're not racist. And I think at some point it's going to be too cheap and people are going to see through it. But I think it's the play to make this year because the DNC is just going full woke. The Democrats are going full woke. So we sort of beat them on points here with this naturalization ceremony. I think we beat them on points because they didn't do this. So it is like a card in our deck. And I did want to mention the McCloskey appearance. I thought that was probably, other than we'll get to that. I'm sure we'll get to the opera singer, but the McCloskey appearance was, I think, the best point of the RNC because these people came out for Black Lives Matters the day after they were accosted by the mob, and they famously training their guns on the mob. They came out saying, we support Black Lives Matters. I think they were saying that they had donated.
Well, they gave a hedge bet. I don't think they said they donated. They just said that they're siding with the protest. I think it was done to exculpate themselves from racism. They wanted to like not be labeled as what's happening with Kyle Rittenhouse right now, that everyone's labeling a white supremacist, and that like hurts his case, for better or for worse. And they wanted to get out there and be like, we're okay with the protesters. It was a very hedged statement, which after the charges are gone, they've now gone full into like being right-wing reactionaries. So I kind of understood why they gave that statement, and their representation and what they represent is far more important than that like one statement, which was clearly done as like a tactical move to deflect accusations of racism, and that they're just like these, hateful bigots who just wanted to point guns at Black people.
Yeah, and I think it works to their advantage that they put out that statement initially, and then the next time you see them, they're in the RNC. I think that bodes well for the suburban voters, like the people that are looking at this and going, well, these people were accosted in their own homes. They had to train guns on these people. And look how far they had to go. They had to bend over backwards for Black Lives Matters. And now here they are. They're like speaking for the righteous cause or whatever. I think that was just a real punctuation mark on the whole RNC. And my favorite, I think that really stood out. The nun I liked, but then she started telling us this story about, I was in the army for 30 years and I was like very ambitious. And it's like, oh, lady, just be a gentle nun. Can't you just be like a nice nun? So that was kind of like hokey, but it was unexpected. And I actually think Vernon Jones's speech was really, really cool. He just started dropping bombs, like truth bombs on Black violence and the nature of the Democrats. And I thought he had like the most Candace Owens appearance. Candace Owens didn't speak, but he probably had like the most Candace Owens-esque speech. And so I think for me, other than the ending, those were the real highlights of the RNC.
Yeah, I thought they were all pretty good. No, a lot of it was. And I think just the general aesthetics of just like most of the people who were speaking were like normal middle Americans who were not, fat losers that like a lot of the DNC, if you looked at the video, the Zoom call they did of all the states nominating, it was all fat people like outside en masse who are all like ugly. And this is just bad optics. They were trying to find like attractive women who supported Trump, and they went up there and gave their spiel, or like a generic, or like a really blue collar looking guy at a central casting. They would bring him up there, and it really just represented what middle America, like the best of middle America, and they tried to convey that message. And I think they succeeded in that regard. To go back on some of the lowlights, one of the parts that made the naturalization ceremony so odious on that day, which was on Tuesday, is that they had canceled one of the angel moms from speaking, Marianne Mendoza, because just that day she had she had a heated boomer moment and shared a a Twitter thread saying the protocols of the Elders of Zion are real, are not a forgery, which no, they're definitely a forgery. It's definitely a hoax. And then she's like, read this. This is so important. And then the thread was talking about how the Elders of Zion are trying to enslave the whole all of humanity. And it's like, well, you got to be careful what you retweet there. But it's still, they should have just, I mean, she had apologized. She had deleted it. They should have let her speak or told somebody to go up there to tell about the violence of illegal immigrants. They did have somebody on Wednesday who gave a heart-wrenching story about an illegal immigrant killing his wife, Sam Vigil. But it would have been better, it would have been better if they had that on Tuesday as well to counteract the message in the naturalization ceremony. Because if you have an angel mom speaking there, you're contrasting of like, these are the dangers of illegal immigration. This is why we need to end it completely and not tolerate it. Versus like, we'll allow the really good hard workers who believe in America. And, I don't really like that message, but, it could be a lot worse. But that message wasn't conveyed out there. And there's still some other, I think that was also Tuesday where Tiffany Trump said America is not founded on an identity, it's founded on ideas. And as anyone who's read, early American history, that our founders had very different ideas and fought over it and threatened to duel each other and kill each other and beat each other. And even threatened secession over these ideas. So they didn't really necessarily, ideas was not bringing them together. Ideas were dividing them. What, brought them together was a shared identity as American colonists who believed they had inherent rights as Englishmen to fight for and uphold. And then the ideas, maybe some general ideas, but, ideas also divided them rather than united them.
Yeah. And this line of like, we're all born equal. The original line was, we're all born equally free and that was written in the Virginia Constitution. But of course now, like the Marxists or whatever are pouncing upon this line, and it's just so brutal. It's so brutal to hear this line like over and over at the RNC, and Tiffany Trump like up there at the podium at the lectern, like telling us, we're all born equal, and Ivanka Trump last night, she's like, this is going to be a multicultural society, and this is our multiracial experiment. I mean, she didn't go that far, but it was like, it was so cringe. And to just have these women like these women just like telling us what America's all about. Kimberly Guilfoyle like yelling, she's having like her gladiator.
Yeah, Guilfoyle. I mean, her content wasn't that bad because this is all about law and order, but it was just like her screaming, and it's like Kimberly Guilfoyle. I mean, that wasn't that bad. I think the actual content of her speech was pretty good. It was just the way it was delivered and the fact she's Kimberly Guilfoyle that made it bad. One highlight was Melania showing her absolute disgust at Ivanka last night when she was. It's a viral moment, like she sees Ivanka pass, she smiles at her, and then she looks, and then once Ivanka looks away, she has this absolute look of disgust on her face. And that was pretty base because it shows I'm pretty sure Melania is pretty right wing. Based on her views. I mean, it just doesn't seem like she cares about this stuff. If she was like much more liberal or left wing, I think this stuff would have gotten to the media that she doesn't agree with Trump. She might disagree with Trump for not doing enough stuff, which could be good. That Barron is being raised by a base mom and dad, so that's always good. And Barron's gonna be like 6'11", maybe 7 foot by the time he's a grown man. So. Maybe he's the chosen one. We'll have to see. Barron Trump, 2044. I'd have to look up when. I think 2044 might be the first time he can run. So hopefully we get him on board there.
Well, did you hear this bit with Barron Trump at his school, at his private school, that like some girls were giving him grief, and he said he would have them deported or something like this?
Yeah, I saw. I think that's a BS story because it was like told by this like. I couldn't tell whether this woman was like 50 or 15. It's one of these, not a very good looking women.
Let me believe. I'm a believer.
Yeah. Like she was like saying this, like my friend, and she had like a very gruff voice. So it's like, I can't tell how old this person is. Like it could be anywhere from 15 to 50. And this person was like, oh, my friend said this. And I was like, this is guaranteed like a BS story. It's like heard from like 8 down the line. If it was like, I think those kids, like he's going to school with a bunch of like kids who are raised by liberal parents. And those people are just such scumbags. Like if you could see like what like journalists and liberals have done to the Conway family, how they've all encouraged Kellyanne Conway's daughter to like turn on her parents, and they're like celebrating her twerking videos and stuff. And like, you go, girl. It's like some 45-year-old man who's like single with no kids, like telling her about how abusive her mom is and like telling her to hate her mom. Like these people are total scumbags. And if Barron was like acting out in class, those parents, if they heard it from their kids, would rush to the media to share these stories. I mean, they have absolutely no moral principles when it comes to that. So if it's not coming from the actual direct sources, I don't want to necessarily believe. I mean, that is a digression. I do actually want to make a point. You know, I still want to finish up on the RNC, but I do want to make a point about the Conway family. Is that both Kellyanne and her husband George Conway, who's a horrible never Trumper who works for the Lincoln Project, both announced that they were resigning from the respective positions. Kellyanne from the White House and George from the Lincoln Project to focus on their family due to their daughter continuing to have Twitter meltdowns. And the one thing about this is that this journalists are responsible for Claudia Conway's like. You know, she's 15, but they're exploiting and weaponizing her for their own amusement. And all these journalists, like Taylor Lorenz, I think is the one who first promoted her. She's in her 30s, no kids, like probably never going to have kids. And she's like destroying her parents in the process, Claudia Conway's parents, that is, that both the Conways have played up to journalists. They've leaked to journalists. They've created this, great relations with journalists. And at the end of the day, they've been killed by journalists. Like their journalists turned in their own, like their daughter used those same techniques to use them against her parents. And now they're learning the consequences of playing with journalists. It's like, you may think that they're your friends. You may think you have this good relations and can get your story out. But they will just weaponize your own daughter against you if they think it's like for fun or for clicks or anything like that. So never trust journalists. Never be like the Conways who thought that they for all their lives they played up to journalists and cultivated these relationships, all to see it come and bite them in the ass through their daughter. So that's just the one point I wanted to make about that. The last 2 points I want to talk about the RNC is that we'll finish up with Trump's speech at the end, is that one of the more interesting speeches was Rick Grinnell's speech. Rick Grinnell is a neocon, but his whole speech was about how we're ending the forever wars. We're bringing our troops home. We're not nation building anymore. We're focusing on America First foreign policy. He did talk about how we're getting tough on Iran, which neocons share, and killing Soleimani and all these other things. But his main speech, you would have almost thought, like, wait a minute, this is kind of interventionist. This is almost Pat Buchanan-esque. And it was very strange that he would say this because he's been a long time hawk. He and a lot of other people in the administration have been urging war with Iran in the administration. They've been trying to get Trump to antagonize Iran to a certain state where they would have to go to war and they could topple the regime. He, of course, supports regime change in Iran. But at the same time, his speech, you would have never known this. It was definitely an appeal to an America First foreign policy, which Rick Grinnell has aspirations for higher office. Some of these idiots who are too close with him and like the access, we're all touting Rick Grinnell 2024. I don't think that's going to work because he doesn't really have the charisma. And I still think that Republican voters don't want to vote for a gay man as their president. But he is making this appeal to them, and he does think that this nationalist foreign policy and these America First messaging is the political future rather than his past working with Mitt Romney and neoconservatism. And he was like a close Bolton aide. I think he was one of the people who got Bolton in the administration, and he's now abandoning Boltonism for Trumpism in terms of his foreign policy. likely just a political move, but I did find it very interesting that was the whole gist of his speech, was not something that you would have heard during the George W. Bush era about how we have to be the world's policeman. We have to make the world safe for democracy. We have to take out all these dictators. I mean, even though he was saying we have to take out some of these dictators, that was not the language he was using. And he was talking about how we need it in the forever war. So I found that pretty interesting. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. There were a few people, like Ivanka was very clearly making a speech with a political future in mind. There are a number of people that try to use the RNC, and this has just been the standard for a long time. They use the RNC to vault themselves if they can, to increase their status. It's a place for ambitious people to further their political careers. Nikki Haley is, wanting
Tim
to
Scott,
get back to DC. Yeah, Tim Scott. And so Grinnell, I mean, he's just not a very likable guy. He's not a very charismatic guy. He's pretty decent on policy in some regards, and he's made some good decisions when he's had power. And so that's enough to get some people like really excited about him. But I think that boils down more to access to him than him being any sort of like standard bearer for conservatism in the future. I think he's a thing right now. And I guess I wish him the best as a person, but the American public's not going to vote on a national level for a homosexual, and neither should they, in my opinion. And it's good to see people sort of try to take a more humble approach, to see him change his spots a little bit and move away from the neocon stuff. But people who go that late in life with positions like that, I don't really think they're to be trusted. And the future is more with a younger crowd, not these like house dog, house cat, like homosexual beltway connivers and ambitious people. I just don't think that is the future. And people are really understanding more and more that identity does have some role in politics, not in the leftist sense, but people are going to place some value on that, and personality is politics. I just think he's too dry. I think he's too barren-faced, too dead in the eyes to really.
Yeah, it's really strange. Like his the video he did for the log cabin Republicans about how Trump's the most pro-gay president is like, he had a weird voice during that. And there's just something very odd about it. And I think Republicans are probably fine with like making him Secretary of State, which I think that would be a horrifying idea. I think like Mike Pompeo similarly made, America First rumblings, and now he's, really hawkish. Him as Secretary of State would be bad, but the average Republican voter probably wouldn't mind that. But voting for president, that's a bridge too far for them. And I think even with like Ivanka also has aspirations for higher office and possibly running in 2024. I don't think that's going to work because it's all of her father's charm, and she's even lost some of her standing within the base. I didn't see that many celebrations of Ivanka like you would have seen in 2016 or 2017. She doesn't know how to connect with ordinary Republican voters. Like she thinks that she can win a Republican primary with the Kirsten Gillibrand message, but it like comes from a Trump, and it's just going to be about like women's empowerment in Africa and like how we all need to come together. Like she doesn't want to get involved in messy political issues. She still wants respect from Manhattan liberal elites that she, went to cocktail parties with. She doesn't want to she has none of the populist fire that Trump has himself. And and she's on the completely opposite side on issues from ordinary Republican voters. So I don't think
her husband is a huge liability. I mean, her husband is quite obviously an elitist. He's quite obviously like, he's of this mindset that like, we are going to collaborate with criminals to get them to stop doing crime, which is a very like new age sort of like.
I think the funny thing is that Kushner is actually better than Ivanka. Like, I think Kushner actually gets what like Republican voters want and tries to meet them midway. That's always not good. Because he's coming from a Manhattan liberal perspective, but his wife is fully Manhattan liberal and has no aspirations of reaching to ordinary Republican voters. It would be Trumpism just about business and like helping out women in Africa. There would be nothing there for Republicans, and she doesn't have the charisma and charm to actually reach them. So I think fortunately that Grinnell Ivanka, and even Nikki Haley are not going to do well in 2024.
No.
I mean,
Well,
I could be wrong, but I don't think I am.
I think we have to put our hope in Tiffany Trump. Scott, what do you think?
I don't think Tiffany's that good either. It's all in Barron. Barron is the real hope. I mean, Don Jr. is okay. He's just a goofball. He doesn't really. I don't think he has what it takes either. But he's largely okay on the issues. But the final point is really the highlight was Trump's speech itself. It was much better than the rest of the convention. He didn't talk about how Joe Biden's 94 crime bill and putting away all these innocent drug dealers into jail and all the poor crack dealers. It was all about law and order. It was highlighting his immigration achievements. Well, actually, not all of them. He, for some reason, at no point in this convention did anyone bring up his immigration moratorium, which is one of the most important achievements in the last 50 or so years on immigration. But, no one's really bringing that up. He expanded and extended his ban to include most guest workers and extended it to the end of the year. This is a major achievement, and he has reduced legal immigration significantly, mostly through executive actions and executive policies, conducted through these government agencies. He didn't really mention that, but most everything else he said about immigration was good. He talked about, we're building the wall, we're deporting these dangerous illegals. We've reduced refugee numbers, which is a part of legal immigration. He did mention that we're highlighted that. And he also talked about how he's standing up for TVA workers against foreign labor. That's a very strong message. So he does pretty much everything he said about immigration was good. It's just that, there was a sin of omission there with not mentioning his moratorium, which I don't understand. That's the only gripe I had with it. Otherwise, people said it was too long. I don't really think that was a major problem because Trump doesn't have many opportunities to talk to millions of Americans without the, vice of media control. It's not interpreting him and his fact checks. He wanted to highlight all his achievements and all the good things he's doing and everything that the Democrats are doing wrong. And so he might as well just give an hour-long speech that journalists are, shifting and getting bored by and being uncomfortable and wanting to end. This is not a speech for journalists. This is a speech to everyone in America. And, I thought there was no content that I thought was really objectionable. I thought everything was good. And then he ended with fireworks and the opera singer, which was awesome. And then it ended with the people filtering out and getting, attacked by the protesters, which further helped him. So, I didn't see any problems with it. I thought it was the highlight. What did you think, Steve?
Yeah, I thought it was a home run. It is kind of sad that Trump is still pulling the GOP to the right. We had people like Ronna McDaniel and just these different people that are just there, very obviously, for the better business angle on things, the Chamber of Commerce sort of side of things. And so you can say, oh, well, these people are competent as business people. And so therefore they get to be in the GOP. But really Trump is the only person, I think at all. And I watched basically 3 out of the 4 nights, if we count up all the time I watched, he was really the only guy that introduced that bit of identity. And talking about that, it was settlers, it was pioneers, they tamed the lands, hearkening back to Grant and Jefferson and Jackson and sort of just introducing that identity element. America really is a nation. It's a people. It's not a spirit, as Tiffany Trump would put it, or it's not like an ideal, as Charlie Kirk would put it. It really is a people, and Trump touched on that in his speech, and I thought that was probably, for me, it was the highlight of his speech, and I think that's what is the unifying message, and that really is what brings Americans together. And we know this. Anybody that's been in America for a number of generations knows that this is actually what America is. It's not what the coasts have become. So he did that. I think that was the highlight of his speech. And I do think there was the sin of omission on the immigration moratorium when he was speaking about the immigration achievements. But just to be able to say that, he has booted out 500,000 people from the country. That's a staggering number for most people. It's nowhere near the number of illegals that we have in the United States. But to hear that bodes confidence And then to have this spectacular fireworks show for like a good 7-8 minutes, the sky is just filled up. And then to close out on this wonderful Italian operatic, performance of four songs or whatever it was, and he's doing the Nessun Dorma, and he's doing Ave Maria and Hallelujah. I just think that was so beautiful.
Yeah, no, I think it was
so. The DNC was like Biden and Kamala like walking out on this like little put together stage, and they're just like waving to everybody while Coldplay is playing, and there's all 30 people in their cars like honking
with their mask on, like waving their like chubby little fingers. And it's like it's the DNC had the idea that this was organized by like a 45-year-old affluent white female liberal and awful who's like a middle manager who just wanted like everything. It's like, I love Zoom calls. I love getting us all together. I want us to have masks, so we're protecting safety. We're social distancing. And I want to have like a diverse rate of voices. We have our LGBT people and our Black people, our indigenous people. We're all together. We're just loving it. And it was very much appealing to these like horrible, petty, like awful tyrants who just want everyone masked up all the time and like sitting through a miserable Zoom call. And even like kids are on Zoom call in their class. And it was just like, it was like, it reminded Americans of like our current like shitty America where we're like stuck at home and like the kids are like wearing masks to their first grade Zoom class. Like nobody wants, like everyone hates this. And like Trump represented like a televised spectacle that people can like aspire to and enjoy. And I think in like they're usually after these conventions, like, the party that had it first, like there's a bump. And it's showing the poll numbers are actually declining for the Democrats, while I think there's going to be a major convention bump after the RNC. So I think overall it was, it was a great speech by Trump. Could have been a lot worse, certainly. He definitely conveyed all the right messages, and I think he's going to get a bump from that. I think that we're seeing, the Trump that we wanted, for so long. I mean, yes, it's campaign season. Of course, he wants to run on what he ran on in 2016. And as your point is, he's still more right-wing than the rest of his party, and he's the one pushing it. And without Trump, we would revert back to Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio types. So, of course, Trump is a disappointment, but you have to be thankful for what you have. I don't think there's any choice in this election. I mean, Biden and Harris would allow Antifa and BLM to run rampant throughout the country. The Trojan horse saying that they say about Biden is 100% accurate. It'd be a radical left-wing takeover. But, on that point about the riots, moving on to what's happening out in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Kenosha, not the, first place you'd expect for racial violence to occur because it's majority white. I think it's only 10% Black, but it is the center of our latest national race controversy. People are rioting in the majority white Kenosha, Wisconsin. The cause? A Black sex offender, Jacob Blake, was shot during a brawl with police. He was shot after moving away from officers and tried to snatch from his car. He'd also been fighting the officers and had been called on because he had been brawling in the street, and he had an outstanding sexual abuse warrant out on him. He had been tased, but it didn't work. And Blake is now paralyzed due to the gunshots, but that's why you don't resist arrest and you don't reach for a knife in your car. Sad, but that's the way it works. It's amazing what happens when you just cooperate with police. But the poor innocent man's injury has led to destructive riots in Kenosha. And now the vigilante case of Kyle Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse, of course, successfully defended himself against rioters with his gun, killing 2 and wounding another. He's charged with first-degree murder, but it looks like he will beat it. What's your take on the Rittenhouse situation?
Well, my take is a spicy one, Scott. Thank you for asking me. I think that, you watch the video and it's very obvious that he was in mortal danger. And even if he wasn't in mortal danger and a guy's swinging a skateboard, that is still, you could get a fractured skull from that. You could be in hospital. You could be looking at a lung hospitalization from what someone's able to do just with a skateboard. But very obviously, the one guy was pulling a pistol, and you look at the latest footage that's come out of that, and it's very obvious that this guy was making a move to shoot Kyle in the side of his head, execute him with the pistol. So I think Kyle Rittenhouse is innocent of the charges. We can sort of get into the why go to these events and why be at these places. But his path is sort of sealed at this point. He's a marked man for the rest of his days. The left, the left hates patriots. The left hates people who support the police, and the left especially hates when people take things into their own hands and they don't rely on the government for defense and for security. And so Kyle Rittenhouse, he shot at first. There was someone shooting a pistol at him or in the air toward him, and then he was being run down and attacked physically. And then one of the guys that he shot to death, he blew the one guy away like right away, and that guy was a goner immediately. And then this guy who was going for the execution, he pretended to be giving up for a second while Kyle had his rifle trained on him. And then when he pulled his rifle away, this guy made a very extremely quick move for his pistol and was going for the execution. This guy just had his bicep blown off. I don't think he was killed. But then when he was asked, in this Facebook sort of comment or whatever that his friend posted with being with him at the hospital, what he said and being asked about the situation was he'd wish he'd only just emptied his clip into Kyle Rittenhouse. So that's attempted murder. That's a clear motive. The wrong person is in prison right now. The wrong person is in jail right now. Kyle Rittenhouse should be freed from where he's at there in Illinois. And also there should be like some significant federal intervention in regards to this clerk's office or whoever is pressing the prosecution there in Wisconsin, because this is flagrantly anti-constitutional and illegal and just a political witch hunt on Kyle Rittenhouse. So the guy's innocent. His path is sealed. I don't advise for this sort of thing. I don't advise, like, we need you in November. Like, you need to vote, not be, like, in jail.
Don't go to jail. No, I agree with everything you said. With the point about advice, this is, like, Rittenhouse did nothing wrong, but there is questions over whether it was wise to go there. I mean, what he did in that immediate scenarios with, like, these guys charging after him, and also these guys are all felons. Like, all three of the people he shot, like the one guy he shot in the head was a sex offender. I think of what you could of a minor. I think you could call him a pedophile. The other one who hit him with a skateboard was a domestic abuser who is now, like, GoFundMe is calling him a hero, and his girlfriend's like, he's the greatest man ever. And it's like, his criminal record says otherwise. And the guy who got his arm blown off is not allowed. He was illegally carrying a weapon because his last charge was for some weapons violation, and he was not supposed to be carrying a gun. And all these liberals are like, we need real gun control, and you're over here celebrating this hero who's not supposed to be using a firearm, getting his arm blown off. And everything he did in that situation, totally justified, was the right thing. But actually going out there to these events, not wise, because even if Rittenhouse gets off, like, his life is forever changed. I don't want to necessarily ruined, but it's forever changed. He's going to have to likely legally change his name. People are going to be sending him death threats throughout his life. Just look at George Zimmerman and Darren Wilson. Like, Darren Wilson, I believe, was fired from, like, a factory job when they found out he was the Darren Wilson. And same with, like, Zimmerman. I mean, Zimmerman, like, went crazy after he was exonerated because he was, like, the most hated man in America. And people wanted to kill him. And it's the same going to happen with Rittenhouse. So even if you do become, you're let off, and there's several legal costs that are happening with that, even though I think with Rittenhouse, a lot of people are coming to his aid and providing the resources, which is good. And there is, like, a larger symbolic value of he gets let off, and it's like shows that you can defend yourself without having to go to jail for life.
Right.
Which sets a huge precedent. You don't want to be made the example, because there could be a lot of other cases. Like, you could be murdered. Like, if that guy had shot him in the head, I guarantee you that he would have been turned into a hero, and that they would have given him like a much lesser charge, and there would have been legal resources pulled up, and you would have seen like CNN calling this guy a hero, even though he's a felon who wasn't supposed to be carrying a firearm. They're celebrating the sex offenders in this regard. I mean, both with Jacob Blake and the first guy who got killed and the skateboard guy. So, it's not a situation you want to be in. You got to avoid these riots. And even just by your mere presence at this stuff, they will blame the violence on you just for being there. Like the Financial Times and a couple of other outlets, I believe, blame Nick Fuentes for, the riots were happening in June because he merely showed up and watched one in Tampa. And they're like, Nick Fuentes was there. And this is showing white supremacists are actually secretly engineering these riots. So, any situation, or there's other situations where they gang up and try to kill you. So Eddie, probably shouldn't go. Maybe if you're watching from a far away distance, like that's fine. Or if it's like your business that's being threatened and you want to protect it, that's a different story. But I don't recommend going out there and becoming an example.
Yeah, if the government can hardly protect Rand Paul or can hardly protect Vernon Jones in DC, you just really need to think about what is it you want to accomplish, what your life is worth. Is your life worth 2 thugs, or is your life worth a lot more than that? And you're needed in November because the Democrats are going to try to steal this election very obviously, very blatantly, and very incompetently, by the way. And they're going to get caught doing it, and then they're going to throw their final tantrum. They're going to pull out all the stops. And so, do you want to be tied up here in the next couple months with legalese and maybe being locked up, or in the hospital because someone took a errant punch at you and broke your orbital lobe or whatever? It's very obvious the government doesn't want to. The Trump isn't sending in the feds all the way yet, and he's blustering, but he hasn't sent them in all the way yet. So do you really want to fill in that gap and risk yourself, or do you want to wait till November, or you want to wait to see how things shake out and then make your decisions? Because this decision for Kyle Rittenhouse was a decision with a lot of finality. Like you said, his life is never the same. Like I said, he's a marked man for life. This dictates the rest of his life to a large degree. This was a decision of finality. And, he was quite competent when he was under fire. And so the left needs to think twice about what they're getting themselves into, because if a 17-year-old kid can pick off 2, almost 3 thugs with relative ease, they really need to think about what they're getting themselves into. But you also want to think about what you're getting yourself into, because you're sort of putting your own destiny out of your hands. One angry black woman accosting you, and then you swing back, and then suddenly 5 black guys are on you. I mean, that is something that changes the course of your life. And do you want to go out as an individual, or do you want to see what MAGA is going to do and see how MAGA is going to handle this, and sort of stick in the slipstream of that? And really, MAGA is going to be making decisions on the destiny of America with finality. So do you want to be a part of that, or do you want to go out and play the hero preemptively? It's just something that people really need to think about. This guy's 17. His life will never be the same. And, he'll likely he'll never be a groyper. He's just never going to be in the headspace.
Which everyone should have the right to become a groyper. I mean, that should never be denied. I agree. Yeah, his life is definitely going to be forever changed, and he's not going to have the opportunities that he would have had. That's not necessarily to say what he did in that situation was right, was 100% justified, but you need to avoid these situations because you might not be as lucky as, he is lucky in this regard, in that it's very clear that it's an act of self-defense, and most of conservative Inc. is defending him, and he is getting the resources he needs, and he was not hurt. He was not killed. But he is lucky in this regard, and you might not be so lucky. And one point that I want to say is that, if you want to challenge these rioters, is that they're semi-sanctioned by the ruling regime. And it's not really, people are like, oh, well, Trump is in office. Why isn't Trump shooting them? And it's well, Trump he only controls one part of the government, and he doesn't control the culture, the media, or, the House of Representatives. The Democratic Party is mostly supportive of this. The media is 100% supportive of this, and they'll run cover for them. I mean, as we saw on the CNN Chiron this week, where they had fury but mostly peaceful protests, and they had the anchor out there, giving his news report, and there's a burning buildings in the background. It's total Stalinist level propaganda that they're going with, that they'll just run with. They're all saying that like mostly peaceful protest leads to burning buildings and dead people. I was like, what? No, that's not what peaceful protests do. And you have to just compare this to like Charlottesville. Well, Charlottesville was the greatest atrocity to ever occur in American history. And the level of violence there was far less than what we see on an average night in America now. And that was a mostly peaceful demonstration. I think most people would agree with that. I mean, there's just some brawling and stuff. I mean, and eventually it led to violence later on that wasn't necessarily connected with the protests. But compare that to what we see now on a nightly basis. I mean, even look at Minneapolis, which is now under rioting and looting again because these idiots believe a black murder suspect killing himself was actually the work of police, and he was totally innocent, by the way, and he had no gun on him. They believe these lies, and now they're rioting and looting. And there's this viral video of a cop getting hit with, I believe was a hubcap or some type of object, and them all celebrating this cop nearly getting killed and on social media. And they can't do anything about them. They are semi-sectioned by the powers that be. I made a controversial point this week, making a historical analogy between what we're seeing, BLM and Antifa, and another group in the past. And people got very upset about it. Here's what I said. Quote, I hate the leftists are the real Nazis meme, but the semi-sanctioned way Antifa BLM act right now is basically how the SA Sturmabteilung operated in the first year of the Third Reich. They're allowed to do whatever they want, and the authorities can only grumble about it. And a lot of people, some people were just like open Nazis, or like, how dare you insult the SA? They're heroes. And it's like, you're in America with no German ancestry. And it's like, why do you care about this 90-year-old regime? Like, shut the fuck up. And anyway, they're all complaining about this.
Go off.
So some people were like, you can't make any of these comparisons. There's better ones. There's not that many better ones actually from a communist regime, except for the Red Guards and under Mao, is that the SA in the first year of the Third Reich were just allowed to run rampant. They were some people in the government really didn't like it. The army didn't like it. A lot of the conservatives that Hitler was allied with were, very upset about it. And, elites were not very hesitant, but the government itself just let them. And they're like, and the government hadn't necessarily made them totally state-run. They were independently operated, and they were doing whatever they wanted. And eventually, their chaos led to so much that's why the Night of the Long Knives happened in June of 1934, is that they got out of control and they had to put them down. And due to pressure that they were causing too much trouble, but they were allowed to do whatever. They could go out and beat people up. They could smash a storefront. They could just do whatever they want. They didn't have to worry about arrests. And BLM and Antifa operate in the same manner. The only difference is that SA was an actual organized group with hierarchy, ranks. There was actual leadership. There was people in charge. You knew who they were. And they were a membership organization that, these were like an actual group. Like Antifa and BLM are a loose organization of people. There's no members. It's just random people show up and they're marching for Black Lives Matter or Antifa, and then they go cause chaos. This is really just a disorganized mob.
They're essentially anti-white. I mean, and the SA was
anti-white. And they're a mob.
Like counter-communist.
Yeah, they're a mob. They're not an organized gang like the SA were. And so there's some better, the only two other examples I can really think of historically is Red Guards, which were also just a disorganized mob that went after particular dissidents, which Antifa and BLM aren't necessarily, specifically targeting people. They're just like going after whoever they think is a racist, and like going after suburbs or going after auto dealerships or anything like that. And then there were the Black Hundreds and the Tsarists in, the early 20th century Russia, who were a disorganized mob that the government was encouraging to go after their enemies. So there are a few examples, but, not every, Nazi comparison is cringe or off base. I was, of course, not comparing the ideologies between Antifa and BLM and the SA, which, of course, they had radically different ideologies. Wasn't saying that they're the true Nazis. I'm just saying that this is an interesting historical analogy of where people who, at least part of the government or part of the powers that be fully support these violent, people committing street violence on a regular basis, and these people are allowed to do whatever they want. Even when they get arrested, they're let out and charges are dropped. The one analogy you have is when the Nazis first took power in the SA. So that was the general point.
Well, and people have to bear in mind that, like, just because Trump wins, it's not like resolved. I mean, there is just so much that is still arrayed against Trump. I mean, there are so many crooked DAs across the United States. There are so many, mayors and governors and deep state types. There are even portions of the military that aren't exactly 100% loyal to Trump. Like, there is a huge array of power set against him. And so in some ways, these demonstrations and these riots and this mayhem and anarchy that's been unleashed this summer is a victory lap. It's really significant, and they are semi-sanctioned. And you do look at who's getting the charges. I mean, the people that were getting charges in CHOP were all right-wingers, and the charges against leftists were being dropped. You look at stuff like the bureaucratic administration and how they're like retraining their employees to be anti-white. There is still so much largesse in the United States, and so you just have to bear in mind that it is a semi-sanctioned situation, and there is so much weed whacking that Trump is going to have to do in his second term to even get a hold of this. It's not like an outright victory. It's like staving off ultimate peril if everyone votes for Trump and Trump actually wins. There's still actually a lot of action that needs to be taken to dismantling this significant apparatus. So you look at Antifa and you see them dressed in all black. They're basically like one step below United States Postal Service workers. Like they're just almost like right there,
Yeah, they're there, and there's and then there's like an example is like the Portland DA is like, we're not going to really pursue these charges against the people who were like firebombing a federal courthouse, which like, if the right wingers were doing that, those people would be going to jail for life, as we've seen in several cases, such as like when Proud Boys get in bar brawls that would result in mostly just like community service at most for normal people. They're instead getting 4 years in jail. And same with people who were getting into brawls in Charlottesville. That's this completely double standards. And there is a unique composition with this. I think one of the things I'm noticing is that the looters the people who are just like go out and like steal stuff are predominantly black, but the people who are actually like doing the serious rioting, like the burning buildings and like challenging and fighting the police, are overwhelmingly white. We can see that in Kenosha, and we saw that in Portland, where we saw that in Seattle. The one example is that we saw that like it's predominantly blacks who are the ones looting is like the recent Minneapolis stuff that was occurring. Mm-hmm. Like if you looked at the people who were like all going through Target again, it was all blacks. In the Chicago, when they had looting over the innocent man who just pointed his gun at police and was shot, even though they all claimed he was a 15-year-old who was unarmed. When they all went looting, that was predominantly black. So there is like a different motivations that is like here. There's two different groups. There's just like normal inner city blacks who just see this as an opportunity to get like free shit, who will just go to the store and grab and take what they want, versus like these white. Some of them are like Antifa, but there's like a general just like lumpen proletariat element to these people. I mean, if you look at all these people who are like arrested in Kenosha, they're all like petty criminals who are like working at like, I guess they're working as like a dishwasher at some place. Not that there's anything wrong with working in a dishwasher restaurant, but they're like, are they like community college dropouts? It's really Steve Saylor had a great tweet describing the demographics of these people. He's like, white Antifa rioters seem disproportionately pedophile, transgender, drug addict, general criminal, punk rocker, enjoy vandalism and violence, working or lower middle class, physically unattractive. And I think that describes everybody. There was even these people who were accosting the people who had attended Trump's speech at the final night of the RNC, like all these people are just like weird white people who are like, you go to your restaurant and you're order and you see the people who are like preparing the food and they're like all tatted up and they like likely were somebody who was like a middle-class aspirant, but they decided to get into drugs instead. Like there was this woman who was harassing this man and she was like screaming at him in this loud banshee voice. And when the guy like moved to the side and accidentally bumped into her, he's like, "I'll fuck your shit up. Don't fuck my shit. I'll fuck your shit." And then she's like dancing around him. She's like clearly like on drugs and she's got like a balaclava on. And it's like these just like weird lumpen proletariat element. Like I don't think these people are genuinely like working class. A lot of these people are like middle class failures that their like parents like raised them and like, but something went wrong with them.
Something went very wrong, and they're future serfs.
Yeah, and they're just like their only job aspirations is like working at a Chipotle. Not that there's anything wrong with working at a Chipotle, but these like people like this is like
you have a college degree. Like after you have a college degree, you shouldn't be working at Chipotle.
Yeah, and like a lot of they're like people who should have a college degree, but they like failed out because they were like getting high all the time. They're not people who are succeeding in this life. And there's always this Chapo Trap House had a description of their fans as like fail sons, is that they're guys who had the normal middle class upbringing, but they're like they took some community college classes and they're too lazy to actually do them, and they're just like kind of getting by in life, and their main aspirations are just playing video games and smoking weed. And this is like most of the rioters. They're the traditional working class is somebody who's like a welder or working in a factory or something like that, and they grew up in a working class community and area. This isn't really them, but this also counteracts the measure that a lot of conservatives like saying, "Oh, these are trust fund kids, these are the wealthy and stuff." And like, most of them are not. I mean, there are some like rich people who get involved in some of these protests, but they're not necessarily the ones committing all the violence. Even though there is a case where two people who are corporate lawyers who went to good schools were like arrested for throwing Molotov cocktails at a police car. And now all the journalists who see them as fellow members of their class are like, "This is so hard. Why are they being mean to them? They just made a mistake. They need to be let off." And it's like, these people are lawyers. They went to school for 7 years. I mean, our higher education for 7 years. They know exactly what they were doing, and they deserve like long jail sentences. They shouldn't have done that if they didn't. They have thinking. They're not children. They're in the 30s. They know what they were doing. So I think that like saying these are trust fund kids or spoiled is like wrong. I think most of these people do come from middle or lower middle class backgrounds. They're not necessarily what we would traditionally think of a working class, but it is a kind of new proletariat that's emerging, and it's specifically white, even though there's other elements in there. I mean, some of these people you can't really tell what their ethnicity is, or there's a lot of Hispanics and Asians.
There's a lot of Jews too, yeah.
Yeah, there's Jews, and there's like all these different groups in there. There's not really a lot of blacks. I mean, there's some like mixed race people and stuff, or people, as I was saying, you can't really tell what they are. But it is like a new proletariat that's merging. That is not it's primarily in the service sector. Most of these people a lot of these people probably should have, could have gone into the middle class, but due to their own decisions, you can't really blame the 2008 recession anymore. I mean, that's like 12 years ago, and most of these people are younger than me.
Well, these people are also, they're like daycare kids. Their parents were, America's economy through the boomer generation and the Gen X generation, a lot of it was jobs, project stuff. A lot of it was federal spending. And so a lot of these people were like daycare kids that had state employee parents. And that, like, when you think about this sort of like biologically, or as like an economic phenomena, these people are like echoes of these job projects, sort of undertakings by the federal and state governments through those prosperous years. And they wouldn't otherwise exist. Now, I'm not saying they should be eradicated, but it's like they just had, like, there were no incentives. There was no biological imperative for these people to pick up like productive enterprise type skills. And so what they're left with is like getting, gauged earrings and like serving burritos, and like this is sort of what's left of them because they like really shouldn't have existed in the first place.
And committing petty crimes. A lot of these people have like criminal records. There has been some like solidly middle class people, as I was saying before, as there were a high number of like lawyers and professionals who were arrested in Portland, who were in their 30s, who shouldn't have been out there. But I think they're not the ones making up the majority. And that was like a very special case in Portland and in the early days of the riots. I think the really hardcore that we're seeing out in Kenosha, and the ones who are really making Portland continue to go on, and in Chaz, were this new lumpen proletariat that is emerging.
Yeah.
And some of them are like into petty crimes, and the chief attribute is just like mental illness and drug abuse.
That's so true.
And or as Steve Saylor is pointing out, that's like all the demographics you need to know. Yeah. So great country that we have to deal with, that these people who, their lives are miserable and terrible, but they have tremendous power and influence, are able to do whatever they want due to the people who have great lives and are wealthy and, enjoying the fruits of America, give them, carte blanche to do as they please because they think it's doing it for a good cause. And so a lot of these people have like genuine anger. And I think they've been hurt by the coronavirus. I mean, the service sector was significantly damaged by the epidemic. And they do have genuine anger, and now that they're allowed to do whatever they're doing as long as they have a Black Lives Matter sign with them. So I think that, and if there's like long-term damage from coronavirus, which there likely will be, I think this element will continue to engage in violence, and there needs to be real, solutions to figuring out what is. I think there is like a social cultural rot, is that a lot of people are just going into, there is like a certain middle class element. Like I knew kids in high school who are probably out there, rioting right now. And they're just like the people who just didn't succeed into making it into the middle class. And there's not much opportunities for those people to make like a real sustaining life. And they're not really interested in making a family. And, rioting is what they live for. So it's a sad day, but, to finish up, we'll finish up with a reader question that is about the riots. Just a reminder that you can get the power to ask questions as well if you sign up at Highly Respected's Patreon page and sign up for the patron option, actually. Mispronounced that. This one comes from Tom. He asks, Scott, do you actually think the new riots will help Trump? His poll numbers declined when they first erupted in June. What's the difference now? Well, his poll numbers are increasing right now, so it does seem the riots are helping him at this moment. And the best indication of this is Democrats are starting to condemn the riots, and they're getting very nervous about this. Muriel Bowser, D.C. mayor, was condemning people in D.C. who were getting up in the face of diner patrons who were simply enjoying a meal, and they're screaming at them to raise their fists in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. And of course, all these people were white and a part of the white lumpen proletariat that we're just discussing, who were demanding that they raise their fists. And it was really like two sides of leftists like arguing with each other. It's like the well-off liberals versus the not so well-off leftists demanding that they raise their fists in solidarity. And most of the well-off liberals were raising their fists anyway because they're cowards or they actually believe in the cause. So it was an indicator. But she was condemning them. Joe Biden is starting to condemn the riots and is open to using National Guard. When Minneapolis, when their new riots happened there, the governor immediately was starting to send National Guard and sending additional resources, which he did not do in late May when the George Floyd riots first happened. Wisconsin, they're starting to send more National Guard there. They do realize, and it's all Democratic-controlled government, they do realize that the riots are starting to hurt them, and his numbers are improving. I think what hurt him in May is that, or in late May when these first occurred, is that he had no real response to it. And they were so focused on the horror of George Floyd's death that they didn't really pay attention to the riots. And all these Republicans were just simply focusing on George Floyd and just like, oh, there's riots. And they were happening everywhere and throughout the country. I mean, from, random places like Columbia, South Carolina, Roanoke, Virginia, they were just everywhere had these riots, and they were just going, and everyone was experiencing this. They were seeing chaos before them, and ordinary people who aren't paying attention to politics would notice that they can't get through their town anymore because rioters are blocking the entrance, and they can't move around them because then they'll be arrested and, you know, face serious charges. So there was this type of just like chaos, and Trump wasn't doing anything. He was hiding in his bunker, of which now he's taking a firm stance against it. You know, he's saying law and order. There's been evidence of him trying to do something in Portland. You know, he sent federal agents out there to calm the protests, and then the city sent him away. And, you know, he's like, well, I tried to do something, but, you know, Democrats don't want me to. They want to burn down your city. And it's now the riots are just focused on a few key places. I mean, Kenosha and Minneapolis, both in battleground states, and both those, and polling in both those states show Trump getting close to tied or ahead, and they are definitely helping him. I mean, there's a new poll come out from Michigan, which Michigan has shown Trump down by double digits for months. It's now showing Trump ahead in one latest poll. Now, this poll was done, the group that does it, Trafalgar, most of their numbers have been more favorable to Trump than other polling groups. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt, but it does show that there is, you know, Trump is gaining support. So the riots are helping him. I think Americans are getting the message that Democrats are on the side of rioters. This isn't just a one-off over, you know, one murder, that this is going to be a constant state of life going forward unless something changes. And they do. And people in the suburbs are experiencing crime increase. I know people out in the Chicago suburbs who are complaining that, you know, cars are just getting stolen now, and police are just telling them to just hand over your keys and just don't worry about it. Just hand over your possessions to people, and maybe we'll catch them. Probably not. You know, that's not our job anymore. So I think people are experiencing, you know, a serious decline in their life. And there's other cases that are helping Trump. I think, you know, Biden calling for a national mask mandate and saying we're going to lock down the country again. Even liberals don't want a total lockdown of the country. They just want, like, their state that they hate to have a total lockdown. You know, they want red states to have it. And I think people really don't like the national, like wearing masks, unless they're really goofy white liberals in urban areas. So I think if we're looking at the polls that is helping him, it is now able to build the narrative that he wanted, that he wasn't able to when these first started in late May and June. You know, that this is what will happen if Democrats take power, that they'll just allow riots to run rampant. Now, you may say, like, well, why doesn't Trump do more? Well, you know, it's a campaign. He doesn't have the political capital. After he wins, he would have the capital to actually, you know, keep federal agents there. And I think Democrats, you know, noticing the loss in business and their normal middle class people who support their cities to continue getting upset by this, would eventually side with Trump and realize that it's no longer a campaign issue. You know, the next campaign is in 4 years.
Right. Well, I think one other bit is, like, it's very obvious that people from Milwaukee and Chicago are, like, driving to Kenosha. It's very obvious that people from LA and from Seattle are going to Portland. So I think voters are starting to realize that this is spreading. It's not just in these cities anymore where they just figure, it's kind of a liberal shithole. Like, it's just going to be bad. It just comes with the territory. It's Detroit, whatever. It's starting to spread to, you know, third tier cities at this stage. And that's waking up a lot of voters because they don't want to see the spread.
Yeah, I agree. So I think this is all ultimately going to play out. It's playing out well for Trump. I think Trump's chances of winning are much better, and we're probably going to see a post-convention bump next week. So things are going well for him, surprisingly. So we'll see what happens. But, you know, that's all the time we have today on Highly Respected. So, Steve, how can people follow and find your work?
Well, I guess you got to find me on Telegram. That's I was banned from Twitter for some innocuous tweets, and now YouTube is actively censoring me. My latest offering is a song called Heave Ho. So you can look me up, Steve Franssen, Heave Ho. You can watch my music video. I'm a total genius. The world is sleeping on Steve Franssen. I just keep getting shadow banned. So that's probably the main way. And then you can go to StephenFranssen.com. That's Stephen with a V, FRANSSEN.com. And sign up for my email list, and we'll be in touch.
Great. Well, it's great to have you on again. We'll have to have you, of course, invite you on down the line in the future. So thanks again for coming on, Steve.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, this is my second showing. Hopefully, I'll be a third. I'll be the first 3-time guest on Highly Respected. Thanks so much.
Well, I've got bad news for you. There's been other 3-time guests, but you know what? You can, if you work really hard, you can also be a 3-time guest. So you know, something should be on your bucket list. But anyway, thanks for coming on again.
Thanks so much. See you, Scott.
You're welcome, man. And until next time, stay respected.